Carl was doing a TV show out at Opryland, and I was dating a girl who worked for MCA at the time. And he'd made a record for, it was either Decca or Dot at that time. That was all part of the MCA thing. And I went out with her and got to meet him, got it signed, and I've still got it framed upstairs as to your buddy, Carl Perkins. You know, he was sweet as could be. But then later on, after Radney and I had made some records and had a little bit of success, we ended up doing a few dates with him and his sons and their family band. You know, he started with his brothers and he ended up with having his sons in his band. And we were doing these. We did New York, Atlanta, Houston, and Kansas City.
Did the audiences come out for Carl?
Yes, yeah, and they were nice to us too. And I don't know how many people were there to see us, but we generally got a good response. And Carl would call us up on the song "Your True Love," which, you know, on his recorded version, it has kind of this Everly Brothers call and response thing. Your love within harmony. And so he would get us to do that, which was great. It was fun.
Yeah.
He was always nice to us. Well, we had done those dates with him, and he liked us, you know. And he was talking with his manager. He had a previous country hit with the Judds, and it was called "Let Me Tell You About Love," which was a big hit for the Judds. And Carl was a writer on it and played guitar on it, singer, you know. So he liked being on the country charts, and I think he wanted to have something. And I think maybe we were the closest thing to rockabilly that was happening on the country charts at that time. Our booking agent was a guy named Rick Shipp, and he put me in touch, or said, "Would you take a call from Ken Stiltz, who manages Carl and the Judds?" And I went, "Are you kidding?" Yeah. And they talked to me about working with him. And so I went down to Jackson, Tennessee, where he lived. And it was kind of a trial basis thing, really. And stayed at his house, put me up in the guest room, knock on the door. "Bill, Velda's got breakfast on," you know, it's that kind of thing. And we worked in his pool house, which was, he had a swimming pool in his back patio. And part of it went kind of underneath the patio in his house, and then went out to the garage. And there was a garage on one side and his home studio on the other. And we worked in that studio, and the gear was not, it was pre-digital days, so there was all tape, you know. And unfortunately, I was the engineer as well as I was not I mean, I did a lot of stuff in my home studio and made ends meet, but, you know, I wish I'd had a engineer with me. But still, we made that happen. And we did seven or eight tracks down there. And then I came back to Nashville and got a little budget, and we did 3 more.
Were there any other musicians on these tracks?
Yeah, well, there was Stan, his son, on drums. Greg, his son, on bass. There was a piano player named Joe Schenk, who I think he's gone now too. Stan is still alive. His son Stan, who played drums on all this stuff.
Did you get to go around Jackson with him anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we went to dinner, and he had a restaurant. Was it called Swade's or something like that? Had catfish and things like that. You know, it was sort of a meet and three catfish thing. And yeah, we got to hang out a little bit. And I remember he had a Cadillac, and I remember being in the back seat, and he and Valdo were up front and tell stories, you know. Stan told me a story on the phone not too long ago that I love telling. You mind?
Please.
He would always mow his own lawn. And he'd be out there on the riding lawnmower with ball cap on, sunglasses. And a woman pulls up in the car next, and he shuts off the mower, and he goes, "Yes, ma'am." And she goes, "Does Carl Perkins live here?" And he goes, "Yes, ma'am." And she looked at the big yard, and he goes, "How much do you charge to mow this big lawn?" And Carl said, "Well, ma'am, I've got a special deal with the woman of the house. I get to sleep with her." And she put 2 and 2 together, and, you know. But I love that story. One that kind of was like actually emotional was when he talked about when he was young, he had to pick cotton. And I mean, there's a lot of guys from that area, from the Memphis Delta kind of area who did that. And they would, white and black would be out picking in the cotton fields. And he was a kid, and he learned guitar and singing from one of the guys who he'd out there be pick cotton with. And the way he would tell the story was almost like a minister. He had this kind of vibe about him that would, he was a great storyteller, and I just remember a lump in my throat just listening to him tell me this story. I remember asking him, there was one ridiculously crazy Sun record that he made back then that was called Her Lub Rubbed Off. Give it a listen, it's definitely risque. And I said, what was going on that night? And he goes, we may have been drinking a little bit, and I think, he was really forthcoming with a lot of stuff. He wasn't too guarded. He was really a nice fella. Well, he lost an amazing opportunity by having a car wreck on the way to Perry Como. He was going to do Blue Suede Shoes on Perry Como's show and had a car wreck, and that sidelined him, and Elvis went ahead and put it out and changed. I mean, of course, Elvis doing that song really did make him a career, but he did have he did have a hit with it first. And it could have gone that much further had he been on that TV show, but and then he also had another wreck years later in the early 60s where he cut, that was a thing on stage where he had stuck his hand, he playing guitar, and went up and there was a fan and ripped his little finger off and started bleeding, and they had taken him to the hospital and had to have it reset. He would do this thing though where he had, the way he had his little pinky set, he could do the movement and kind of hit, and kind of tap with it. Yeah. He was a great guitar player.
Was he particular about what guitar he played on a session?
He had Leo Fender had given him a G&L and signed the headstock, and so he used that a lot. I played some guitars on the sessions. There's a song on this new collection called Some Things Never Change. Plug. And
we're leading up to it.
Okay. Right. And the first cut first side is called Baby Bye Bye. And I kicks off with my acoustic. And then when Carl comes in, it's just electric, and great. And I'm singing harmony with him on that, which is kind of nice.
I just had to feel great.
Even now, 35 years later, it still feels good.
Was Carl particular about anything when you were recording?
We picked songs early. But I went through, he gave me like 3 cassettes full of songs. And I remember trying to talk him into a couple songs that he didn't go for. Like there was a song of Joe Ely. It's called I Had My Hopes Up High, which I thought he would.
It's a great song.
Thank you. But I didn't convince him. But I did, everybody had agreed that Hyatt's Memphis in the Meantime was a perfect call, and that was definitely, we knew we were going to do that. And the demos we did in Jackson were to try to find some other things, and once we got a little budget going, so.
And I was going to ask, when you did it, was this just something you were doing out of your own pocket?
My own time, my own dime. There was I felt, like I said, I felt like I was on trial, but and then when the smoke cleared, there was two weekends at his house, and then another couple weekends in Nashville. And then, or I don't think they were weekends, I think they were during the week. But he had gigs. I remember everybody was touring. And so we were fitting this in between his road schedule and our road schedule. And he liked what we ended up with. And but nobody bit at the time. In fact, the people we had hoped to get, which was RCA Records at the time, just didn't do it. But I think part of that had to do with the Judds kind of splitting and going to another label. And Ken Stilt's the manager. He kind of he split from Carl. He split from them. It just all kind of fell apart.
The folks watching this might be thinking, how could Carl Perkins not get a label to put something out? But it's kind of rough sometimes.
You got to realize in those days, do you remember that famous picture of Johnny Cash shooting the bird?
Yeah.
You know, I remember Deaf American used that when they finally put out one of those first of those Rick Rubin, Johnny Cash records. And Johnny had a hell of a time, you know, getting records put out. You know, people just, you know, the flavor of the month always takes over from the classics. And you know, it's hard to be a star forever, you know.
Meanwhile, there's people like us who like, it's freaking Carl Perkins, man.
Exactly, yeah. But it was a big thrill for me, and it was something I would put on my resume whenever I would, like, you know, if anyone ever asked, hey, what have you done? You know, it's like, well, yeah, I got to work with Carl Perkins, you know. Yeah. You know, along with whatever sessions I've done, whatever records I've made, you know, working with him was a big part.
Yeah. When you were shopping that, was anybody biting at all?
Well, here's the thing. It was made specifically for a set of circumstances to happen with his manager, with, you know, and there was just no interest when that interest left. I don't think there really was a lot of shopping going on. I think the project was just sort of dead in the water. And I didn't feel like it was my gig to go around and try to get something happening. Plus, I was dealing with all my own stuff at the time. And I did, years later, I went and did some remixes on it, which is what's on the record, to take some of the digital reverb that we used back then, which was the bane of the late 80s, early 90s, you know, just that wah sound, you know, and took some of that off. And because Rick Will was the engineer that I worked with in the studio back then, but by that time he had left town, and Scott Baggett and I got in and did a little remix. It still sounds pretty much the same as what Rick and I had, except it was just we lessened the 80s. We tried to take some of the 80s out of it.
What year was this that you recorded?
No, it was actually 1990.
90?
But the sounds were still 80s.
Yeah. If it was 8 or 9 years later, maybe like Bloodshot, would have put it out, or
somebody. You know, a couple of the tracks ended up on a European only Bear Family compilation, which was kind of great because
they do great stuff.
Yeah, and it had produced by, you know, it had Sam Phillips, Jerry Kennedy, and all these different people he had worked with, and there was my name, you know, on there. So, but that was a kind of a one-shot, limited edition deal. And
did you see him much later after that?
No, no. I talked to him on the phone a couple times, and but I went to the funeral, and
was that in Jackson?
Yeah, and yeah, it was kind of a shocker, you know, but he, you know, he had an amazing life, and made some great records, and really made an impact on people.
So this record is finally coming out, though, and it just came out.
It just came out, and here's the cool thing: is that it's on the Sun label, and the Sun label wasn't around for a year. I mean, well, it had been bought by Shelby Singleton, and his family had it for years. In fact, they had offices over here in Nashville, over on Belmont, you know, next to the Sound Emporium. There is still those buildings still there, and but they had reissued a lot of stuff, but really no, it wasn't really a lot of active stuff, and it's part of a label group now, and along with a bunch of other labels. And it's so it's been revitalized, and and it's exciting. And when you see new Sun records made by Ian Hunter from Mott the Hoople, the Steel Drivers, you know, they're all on Sun. You know, and so this is cool that it's out there on a label that's actually doing new stuff, and as well as doing these fantastic reissues of Jerry Lee and Charlie Rich and Carl and everybody else. So
How did it come about that this? How did they know this record existed?
that's a cool story too. I used to work with a fella named Ben Vaughn. Now there's a guy here in Nashville named Ben Vaughn who was a publisher. Not the same fellow. This is Ben Vaughn that I knew was from Philadelphia, sort of up there by New Jersey, and he made independent records. He had songs like Working at a 7-Eleven, and he wrote I'm Sorry, but so's Brenda Lee, that Marshall Crenshaw covered. And Ben made a bunch of independent records, and he came to Nashville years ago, and we wrote a bunch of songs together. And he later went on to move to LA and do Third Rock from the Sun TV show. He did the theme song, played all the instruments on that, and did music supervision for a bunch of things. In fact, he's the reason that 70s show used a Big Star song. That was because of Ben. So anyway, but Ben's still around, and he was in touch with one of my friends at Sun, a new friend at Sun, Laura, and he said to her, Bill, you should get to know BillLlloyd because he worked with Carl. So I met her at a party. I got invited to this party and said, hello, nice to meet you. And like you used to give cassette tapes and pass them over here. Here's a few songs you might want to hear. But this was a CD I gave her, old-fashioned CD. And I said, hey, check this out. Just, this is the Carl stuff. And she knew about it through Ben. And that's how that happened.
Do you have a copy of the album here?
Oh, yeah. Just so happened to have one right here. And look at I love the artwork because it's a lot like the...
Beautiful.
It's a lot like the old...
it looks great, man.
Yeah. And anyway, and if you open it up, there's great liner notes on there written by myself, of course. Yeah. This is yours, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Pick up a coffee, folks.